The last day in November had dawned, and in it, history would be made. From the public gallery looking down on the legal court in which the White and Gamot was to assemble, Harry Potter watched the staff elves busying themselves in the task of cleaning and tidying the chamber as his eyelids, heavy with lack of sleep and overwork, considered what the day to come would be like. History in the making, a part of him knew. The temporary historical researcher sagged at the shoulders as he leaned upon the balustrade, reflecting as the room was being clean, small explosions and after-smoke of localized magical spells being used to dress the chamber in the official ministry sigils. Harry blinked again, as his mind knew that other standards were being hung. The Union flag. What a bizarre place to be. Having taken over his mum's role as she gradually became consumed with the work of the reciprocators, even more so when Dad had taken over the role of leader, and having finished his first professional summary as a ministry researcher, the history of all magic, Harry knew today, with the presence of non-wizards passing judgment as equal to wizards against potential wizard criminals, the day was already saturated with a significant event for the future. Carefully, surrounded by the sound of ministry elves making a hash of something and then having to redo it, Harry closed his eyes, trying to think of what he would say to Hermione. Although his future wife had come to terms with her role, nuts and bolts come to terms, that is, the workings of her job, Harry knew that inside, Hermione would be hiding her true feelings behind her facade of professionalism. When she would allow herself to feel, Harry did not know. But she would feel, and he knew that giving evidence as, effectively, the opposition to the British ministry, would take its toll. Not least when evidence would come to light about Sam Potter's part in the attacks the month before and how, on 30th October he came to be holding his wand and casting a spell that destroyed a very expensive younger boy's broom just before attacks came to the Quidditch pitch, where the first demonstration of Quibball had been played, the lower hunt having just ended. Almost too good to be true. David Mullen's quip had, for some reason, stuck in Harry's mind. Preparing the documents, which had taken him most of the night and into that morning, Callias had been particular about exactly what he needed, and from which floor down and which shelves, a mission which had kept Harry fit by walking many miles below the streets of London, deeper even than the underground. The charismatic octogenarian, twin of Mick, same cheeky grin in want of forgiveness for misdemeanors yet to be revealed, had ambled through his mind's eye so many times as his words echoed there. "Did you manage it?" Hermione sat next to him, pushing her arm, thick with woolen coat sleeve, though Harry's, which was bent, his chin resting on his hand, and rested her head on his shoulder. "All of what Cleus Lupin wants?" "All, more or less," Harry nodded. "I had to go back many centuries, and there were so many curious and intriguing artifacts." He cut off, mainly because, in all honesty, he didn't know what they all were, and second, he knew Hermione would push him for details he didn't have. Plus, as witness for the prosecution, she should not even be anywhere near Harry that morning. "When is Draco Malfoy due to arrive?" Harry leaned over and kissed her on her sleek, dun brown hair, his eyes closing, threatening not to open again as he did so. At least he might be able to keep down in Arthur Weasley's office for a little while, having no office himself, being only temporarily filling in for his mum, who had always worked from home. There was not a chance in Hades he would be missing the White and Gamot, not with his brother answering charges, his own artifacts coming to bear upon the proceedings and his fiancée bearing witness to the character of Henrietta Edwards. This morning, the White and Gamot will begin at noon. Like the old Saxon Wittens after which they are named, Hermione explained. "You know, I said that the non-wizard Prime Minister would just be present in order to witness proceedings for the non-wizard community." She leaned forward, casting a dim shadow from the only window in the chamber, onto the checked floor by their feet, moving her knees over towards him. "Yes? I don't think that will be strictly true. We have had a White and Gamot since since 937, when the non-wizard King Ethelstan united the British Isles and stopped the Vikings from re-invading. Yes. And how did he do that, without leaving alone the local wizards and witches in each town? He is a very underrated king, if you ask me. He left us well alone, and brought proper peace to the country, like Alfred the Great, his grandfather. I didn't know you knew so much about history, Mayan, nodded Harry, with a good deal of satisfaction. Normally it was he who was the bearer of interesting facts, due to his job, but knew so few wanted to hear them. But the soft puffing near his shoulder meant that, like him, Hermione was also exhausted for, like him, she had probably had little sleep as she prepared for today and, while the stress did not show, yet, it would be simmering away below the surface, ready to manifest itself at a later date. A ray of sunlight, weak and dispassionate, found its way to the window behind them, and made a feeble attempt at illumination. Harry put his head on Hermione's and the two of them slept their immediate tiredness away for a few hours until they were discovered by three court imps whose job it was to prepare for the White-and-Gamot. You might not think that a hefty kick in the shins would do it for the sleeping pair from some 6-inch magical creatures, but their toes came sharp and, close to 12, midday, Harry returned, rather more refreshed, but a good deal more tense, to more or less the same seat overlooking the court below. 88,888,888. In the supreme mugwump's chair sat tall, well-built wizard, limestone white hair swept back into a bow, piercing blue eyes which spoke the words that he was yet to. European President Draco Malfoy, whose presence had not gone unnoticed by several of the female witches in the ministry upon his arrival, stood, on the bell strike of 12, the bell being that of Big Ben, whose chimes had been conveyed down to the chamber by means of a non-wizard radio, in keeping with the spirit of non-wizard/wizard relations. Harry knew that they would not be hearing the last of that from Mick Mullen for a good while after the trial was over. Surrounding him, in the small spectators' gallery, and craning over for a better view, were his parents, his mum frantically waving her arm towards Sam, who was sitting next to Cleus, chosen to represent the facts of the evening of the Halloween games, with Sam included in them, the boy a witness, technically, Cleus had explained, rather than a defendant. But from where his elder brother was standing, 30 feet and 45 degrees up, it looked more the opposite. Sam smiled back a little, trying to look brave, and a tear welled up in Harry's eye. He had never seen his brother that nervous before, and here at an inquiry too. He knew, everyone knew, Sam was not here to be brought to justice in any way. The White-and-Gamot was there to establish the facts surrounding the night of the Halloween games and the attacks perpetrated against non-wizards in the breaking of the glass, the message to destroy those misborn, the alleged conjurists. Sirius felt he wasn't up to coming, James Potter explained. His face lined and more tired than ever Harry had seen it, crinkling into a half-smile when he noticed his elder son had come over to them, but sends his love. Mick and Bathsheba are holding the fort, we couldn't miss this for Sam. Indeed not, thought Harry. None of us could. We couldn't miss it for a lot of other reasons too, but Sam, oh dear, yes. His poor, darling little brother ... in all but name, this was a trial. A trial of what, he wasn't sure of, yet. But to have their 18-year-old son escorted from school under guard to the ministry by Severus Snape in order to give evidence which must corroborate everything that about 10,000 people who had borne witness to the game's events, which preceded the Night of Terror perpetrated, it appeared, against non-wizards. Harry peered down now as the chamber filled up again. More wizards now appeared in the chamber below, ministry wizards. This was true, those from the British Ministry's cabinet. The ancient wizard, Furness, of the Hovel Office had creaked his way, with help, into one of the front oak benches opposite the mugwump chair, the first of the cabinet to arrive save Cleus, and he gave the Minister for Magic a quavering grin as he waved his arm towards him. Across from him, a second wizard approached. This time James Potter raised a hand to Arthur Weasley, whose red hair made a sharp contrast to the muted, monochrome interior of the chamber. Disregarding protocol, Arthur waved back, abandoning for the moment a plan of the chamber, which he had rolled out on an oak bench opposite peaceable furnace. As head of the Ministry for Non-Wizards, Harry assumed that Mr. Weasley's role would connect to that of the non-wizard Prime Minister, who would be in attendance. Harry's mum glanced over to Draco Malfoy, who had noticed the oversight of protocol. Demescujule, the head of the Aurors, and James's boss, who was standing next to Arthur, co-organizing, looked up at him, shaking his head, more out of humoured despair than annoyance. The situation was that bad, every day was that bad, every hour. In the last year, Harry supposed, the Aurors had seen their workload triple, probably more, because of the heightened tensions between conjurists and non-wizards. Security, reassurance, false alarms, more visibility of Aurors around hotspots in the country, open areas, coasts, areas of high concentrations of non-wizards where trouble may begin, cooperation with the non-wizard police, something which Harry knew to have been highly amusing had the many times they had had to work together not also been highly serious. He looks terrible. Lily Potter's face was a mask of anxiety as she turned to address her husband, who pulled her closer in, stroking her back. Harry looked down watching, as Cleus gave a short monologue to his brother who, on its completion, hung his head and he felt his heart lurch. His brother should not be here, he shouldn't have had to be brought here that morning by Snape, in ignominy, from school, missing out on a mid-season Quidditch match, and a quibble fly round. Having to feel like this. It was bad enough that his entire 18th birthday was overshadowed by all of this trouble. Not only that, his mother, Harry's exhausted eyes looked across to her, face crumpled with perpetual worry and sleep deprivation. Dad had even taken her out for the afternoon away just to get away from everything, the loss of their house, the constant reciprocator shifts. Like a child, he had stepped past the door one day the week before, at Grimmauld Place, only to step back, overhearing his father sharing his worries about his mum with Molly Weasley, who had given her soothing advice, that this potential threat to Sam's career was the straw that had pushed her to her limit, and that once things had calmed down, once the threats in the streets were fewer, and they weren't needed to work to death supporting Jules Aurors, who themselves were overburdened, then she may find her strength again. Behind him, the murmuring was growing louder as more people entered the gallery around him, feet shuffled and chairs scraped. Harry looked around as a few other wizards he knew gathered in, some from the Hovel office, some part-timers. He nodded, half-heartedly, glancing at his mum again, who was clutching his dad's hand tightly and leaning over the balustrade, her red hair glinting in the candlelight as she tensely pranced over towards Sam. Down in the chamber, on the oak seating, just to the right of Sam, Jane Jones, head of Wizardly Transport, had entered the chamber, gone back out and looked in, a little bemused, before leaving, gold sparks showing that she had closed the door from the outside again, using her wand. Moments later, the edge of the door frame glowed furnace red, before swinging open. The tall witch stepped back through, standing astride, her wand aloft. Around her, the candles flickered in time with her wand stroke. As one, the people below in the chamber took their seats, looking towards Draco Malfoy, who had his blue eyes fixed on the head of transport as, next to her, another figure appeared, much larger than her, slightly stooped, and was met by Cleus Lupin, who had padded across the stone floor to the British Prime Minister, who was, given his due, not looking as bewildered as others of his status had done in past emergencies when their presence had been required below the Capitol, and their Minister for Magic guided Gordon Brown over towards the neutral witnesses seating, to the left of the Supreme Mugwump. And so, the morning began, which wove onto a lunchtime, and headed on to cumbersome afternoon. The Witan itself, composed of Prime Minister Brown himself representing the non-wizards, Malfoy as the supreme mugwump representing European wizards, and Cleus Lupin representing the case for the wizards, took up places in the back center of the chamber. House imps, one by one, called forward witnesses to bear testimony, the second to last before Herbert, head of defense, witnessing that Mendel Felixson had indeed produced a book, revered by thousands of wizards throughout the country, and the continent, called The Art of the Wise, which he had purchased for home use, an act which, though illegal under current law, was, nonetheless, a commonplace transaction, so widespread the book's influence. The words, curling and twisting in the candlelight, were clear for the Witan to see as Herbert held the wriggling book tight, his arm aloft. Harry felt himself leaning forward too. The book was, on its own, indeed, just a book, something which purported to discuss the history of wizards from the ancient days when those with untamed magic roamed the country, setting up monoliths to better channel energy, or to leave messages for other groups of Neolithic inhabitants. And, admitted Herbert, Harry noticing that he refused to look at Cleus Lupin as he did so, rather, he turned and addressed Draco Malfoy. Under Scottish law, where the books were produced, it was the job of the Witan to prove that Felixson intended to incite hatred with the wording within rather than. The old wizard, one-time teacher at Durmstrang before chancing it over in Britain, standing forward as the first witness, proving his innocence. But, of course, Cleus interrupted, just the last few words of Herbert's speech, but enough to ensure he would be next to make his point, leaping to his feet to continue the prosecution's case and eyeing Felixson with disdain. Your book, researched and formulated to such detail, I would like to congratulate you on this, he added. Mendel Felixson nodded in acknowledgement, his long wispy beard nodding gracefully. Yet you had not the foresight to consider editing your work for your audience? Do you not accept that some parts of your work are, let us say, controversial? Indeed not, counter-argued the aged research wizard, all of the facts are incontrovertible. None can be found to be at fault. At this, a small murmur began with the audience, but all Harry noticed was a small expression change cross Cleus's features. He had seen that same change happen before, not least when he had succeeded in banishing Cecily Lupin across the North Sea under the pretext she was both a vital cog in security, and a danger that needed containing. Incontrovertible, Cleus replied, well, I have to admit to not having read it. However, it is not the factual content to which I am referring, he added, savoring his expectation with relish. I am referring to the moral and ethical means with which you have handled the subject matter, the reason, indeed, the Ministry Cabinet took measures to issue a ban on the sale. Oh, really? Mendel Felixson's uncalled for interruption betrayed what appeared to be genuine shock at the Minister for Magic's explanation. Yes, insisted Cleus, ethical, and moral. That you declared non-wizards to be sub-bestial, that is to say, animals are higher in wizards' considerations than the non-wizard. Indeed they are, some of them, returned Felixson, in that some animals, cats, for example, toads, mice, frogs. Magical creatures. His brow furrowed. Indeed, perhaps the minister may wish to read Newt Scamander's most excellent book, detailing. I am most familiar with Newt Scamander's book, shouted Cleus, his face turning red as one or two titters of jocularity echoed for a second within the chamber. There are many hundreds, if not thousands of moral transgressions against non-wizards, Professor Felixson. That is to say, by failing to consider your audience, you have inadvertently allowed less intelligent wizards in our society form opinions about non-wizards without due care and attention to the intended consequences. For that reason, we chose to restrict sales of the book. However, several thousand black-marked copies flourished, and my esteemed colleague Mr. Herbert, and his errors have had, in effect, their time wasted, attempting to enforce the ban. Well, it must have been very popular, then, concluded Felix-son, face stone-like, and replying to Callias with no hint of comedy in his voice. Either the man was attempting to make the biggest fool of the Minister for Magic than anyone in the world would ever dare, thought Harry, as he looked down at the little wizard, or he was a single-minded, naive simpleton. Callias ignored him, but stepped lightly towards Malfoy. Prosecution number 1 of the day, before the Witan of Friday, 30th of November, 2009, to wit, the defendant, Professor Mendel Boris Felix-son did neglect in his duty in protecting all citizens of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Harry's eyes shot over to Draco Malfoy, who was sitting so high up in the Supreme Mugwump's chair. He knew about Witans, of course, theoretically. But one had not sat for over 1200 years. Was this really how it was supposed to unfold? The defendant, in this case, Felix-son, was now allowed to defend himself, whereupon the members of the Witan would decide for themselves whether the defendant was guilty or not. Should the vote be split, the Supreme Mugwump had the deciding vote. Callias offered for the professor of what could be argued to have caused the most trouble, error and reciprocactor time, damage to property, displacement of homeless, expense and, indeed, deaths, in the last 9 months his chance to defend himself. Felix-son said nothing. In the case of prosecution number 1, how does the Witan decide? For a moment there was deathly silence. No one moved, not in the chamber, where the Draco Malfoy, Herbert, Callias Lupin and Gordon Brown sat, in the higher-up ring of the chamber, not in the outer circle below them, where the rest of the Ministry of Magic, the European Ministry, Felix-son, Sam Potter and his girlfriend Crystal Leah Brandt now sat, shown to her place by Minister Jones, both witnesses called by Callias for what would undoubtedly be prosecution number 2, Thales Blewett and Mark Swales, both immobile, waiting for judgment to be called. No one in the witness section, where Hermione now sat, moved either, as if a twitch or a nug or a word would spoil the moment that was justice being done. And no one around Harry moved either, as they watched, motionless, downwards, as Draco Malfoy raised a hand. Under Scottish law, a subsection of the law of Great Britain and Northern Ireland that is devolved, under which this court stands bound, we find the case against Felix-son. He looked around to Callias, Herbert and to the non-wizard Prime Minister. The 2 wizards held up their wands. Gordon Brown, clearly briefed on the proceedings of an ancient magical rite and playing his part, held out his hand, as would an Anglo-Saxon noble in a comparable non-wizardly Witan. Not proven. Gordon Brown withdrew his hand as he gave his verdict. Proven? Herbert's wand flashed red sparks as it descended vertically to his side. Proven? Declared Callias Lupin, drawing a similar vertical line. The people waited. What would happen now? 3 had given their verdicts. Yet, Draco Malfoy, as Supreme Mugwump, had the casting vote if there was a tie. Mendel Boris Felix-son, whose beard was now busy tying and rittying his own bootlaces, seemed to be on another planet. Malfoy withdrew his wand. Not proven. Chatter erupted all around. To remain impartial, Harry knew, the Witan must not splinter and cleave. However, the look on Callias's face would be enough to freeze oceans and begin an ice age. Let it be recorded, Draco Malfoy concluded, as imps from both the British Magical Ministry, European Ministry and a secretary, who had accompanied Gordon Brown, a thin-faced man in a grey suit who looked as if he'd never seen the sun and that the briefcase he was holding weighed more than he did, leaned over a large manuscript, writing at pace. That prosecution number 1. Professor Mendel Boris Felix-son did not neglect in his duty in protecting all citizens of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. However, Malfoy paused, his long hair flicking a little as he did so. The book has inadvertently caused prejudicial disharmony in this country. As a result, from now henceforth, all copies are to be collected and returned to Professor Felix-son, their owners reimbursed. I gave them away, muttered Mendel Felix-son, to no one in particular. their owners happy to be free of a divisive text, happy in the knowledge that they are doing a duty to their fellow non-wizard citizens. In addition, any wizard knowingly retaining, storing or copying the text is liable for prosecution, as will be any wizard who knowingly keeps from the authorities, magical, or non-magical, information that pertains to a wizard retaining the text. Around him, the scratching of pen on paper next to the Prime Minister, quill on parchment, and small intakes of breath as wizards spoke to one another as they contemplated their immediate future as the law was being put into statute before their very eyes. And now, prosection number 2, that of conjurism on the night of 30th of October 2009. Herbert, head of domestic wizardly security, stood up and began to discuss the details for the benefit of the victim. It was hardly for the benefit of anyone else. All present had, in one way or another, been affected by the events, and the day, today, had finally come where a concrete outcome could be had as a result. I call my first witness Harry looked across to Sam Potter, but to his, and, it seemed, everyone's surprise, not least to Sam's himself, it was Hermione who was called to take the stand. Harry could see she was shaking. He knew she wanted to lose weight before the wedding April, but constant work, skipping lunches, and worry about today's Witten was hardly the healthiest of ways. Not that Harry could see anything that needed to be dieted. To him, Hermione was beautiful. But not living as she did, doing the job she did. Oh yes, the money was good for them, but when she looked so delicate and fragile, was it worth it? Down below, Hermione seemed to sway a little as she stood there, like a branch bowing in a wind, before stepping out of the pew-like seating, walking along the aisle past Cleus and Sam, nodding at Draco Malfoy, her boss, before standing where Mendel Felixson had done not 10 minutes before, at the very center of the area. Not one hair out of place, thought Harry. Suit pressed, shoes polished. She had been up all night going over her small part in all of this. But how was her evidence relating to Henrietta Edwards relevant to the night where all the glass was broken and the message, haunting and sickening, was heard by everyone in the country that night? Old magic, true magic, destroy those misborn, the way is thin, join us. A gasp went up from the wizards around Harry, as the words, just as he was thinking about them, came to life again, in his mind. In everyone else's mind too. There was a scuffle near the balcony edge as some of the wizards who had got the late surged forward to get a better look, squashing some of the others. Hang on! Yelled Harry, just watch out! He added, as a large, black head witch stood on his foot. Below them though, it soon became clear that the words had been said by Malfoy himself, and not etherally, as they had been on that night. Had it really been necessary to say them at all? Those words, began Herbert, have been the catalyst, the permission, in this country, to allow Professor Felixson's ideas, in the form of the old magic, to be transformed into the embodiment of hatred towards non-magical people. By the very language used, the wizard went on, his pale head bobbing as he spoke, addressing not Hermione now, but the chamber's witnesses, and those witnessing him speak, incited what some may have had hidden inside them, in cases as have dealt in every one of our working days, to unalloyed bigotry against the half of the population of this country. We have, he continued, his head still bobbing, and now complementing this bob with a steady pace around the gap between the upper and lower seating in the chamber, worked tirelessly in order to decipher the meaning of this message. Herbert stopped his pace, which to Harry always looked as if he was imitating a contemplative chicken. As Hedera, Harry had smiled to himself over it often. Now, looking back, having spent so long immersed in wizarding history, which had been sold to him as temporary, it felt like a wistful memory. Miss Granger, you work for the European Ministry, is this correct? Hermione said nothing for a moment, the Hedera's sudden question to her a clear momentary shock, from which she quickly recovered. Yes, Mr. Herbert. Her crisp words echoed clearly and assuredly. Hermione was not on trial today, Harry knew. But, for the message sent a month ago, and the prosecution being against conjurism, in a way she was, they all were, simply for being wizards. For being a wizard meant that, in some way, you could be seen as a danger to non-wizards. Even Callias's action, in removing the ill non-wizards, though for a different reason, could be interpreted as such. And, you were close friends with Miss Henrietta Edwards? We worked together, we were colleagues. And, when Miss Edwards was found dead, you were at work. I was at work when I heard the news, Hermione agreed. I was, like everyone else, devastated. And, you were the last to see her? Yes. It has since been shown that, rather than being a loyal and honorable reciprocator, as I know you knew her to be, Henrietta Edwards, along with an elf by the name of Vincento, once in the employ of the British Ministry, as a mysteria, are, or should I say, were, agents of conjurists unknown as yet, on the continent of Europe itself, whose sole responsibility it was to provide information to said conjurists and to plant seditious information, pamphlets, books, such as ones by the esteemed Professor Felix Son. Bravo! Agreed Felix Son, his beard now two braids which were tying themselves into bows. Harry looked across to his parents at this news. Henrietta had been one of their friends, and a reciprocator. He was glad he couldn't see his mum's face now. Her hair hung like a gold sheet down over the balcony as she strained to hear the proceedings. He watched his father place a hand over hers, and felt his own heart compress a little more than it already was, at the fact of his younger brother having been called to witness at the Whitton, and Hermione, below, continuing to literally be at the center of the room. Both, continued Herbert, in his slow, methodical manner, though unknown, were public enemies number 1 and 2 respectfully, though we had no evidence until the night of the 30th October that either Vincento or Henrietta Edwards were the two traitors we were looking for. At the word traitor, an eruption of whispering grew from the chamber below, which caught on, like wildfire on an African plain, in the viewing gallery. Herbert had declared Henrietta Edwards a traitor now, and Vincento, too. What evidence did he have to be so certain? Indeed, agreed Herbert, what evidence do we have? He looked across at Hermione, who looked back at the Hedra determinedly. You were last to see Miss Edwards, before her disappearance, as established in the inquiry into her death last month at the European Court? Yes, nodded Hermione. I had finished having dinner with the Fimlins in Strasbourg, before my promotion. Henrietta was at the office too. I'd returned after the dinner. I went to collect some work that I wanted to complete. She was already there, poring over her work, parchments, it seemed. My thanks to you, Miss Granger, nodded Chief Herbert, nodding his head, chicken-like as he paced nearer to her. That you have confirmed that here and now to the Whitton is what we need. He bowed his head, opening his arm, palm facing Hermione, gesturing towards her chair. Hermione bowed her head, as was customary, to Draco Malfoy, as supreme mugwump as she walked assuredly back to her seat, relief overcoming her features. She caught Harry's eye, and he smiled at her. All over now, it said. All over for her. He returned, and she closed her eyes in apology, before looking across to her fiancé's brother. Sam's face, though trying to look brave, was one built on a foundation of fear. Next to him, Sister Leah Brandt, who too had been sent for to give evidence from the night of the 30th, and had also been brought to the Whitton chamber by Severus Snape early that morning, also gave her best being brave face, though her slim, long features were doing a better job of carrying them off than Sam. Indeed, we have evidence, clear magical forensic evidence, not viable until very recently, that both the witch Henrietta Edwards and the elf Vincento, under the thrall of persons as yet unknown, but known to operate a network of spies, of conjurists, over the whole continent of Europe. Herbert had begun his vague chicken impression walk again as he shared the evidence with all assembled, talking slowly and deliberately, and pausing for breath, or emphasis. Harry was never quite sure even when he had worked for the Era office, getting as high as head of section before being moved on to the historical research. He and Ron had called him Herbert the Hen to one another when the chief had got into his talking way of explaining. The pamphlets, distributed to meeting points of conjurists, yes, those which were declared illegal, and the new ones which were set up shortly afterwards, have been proved beyond all doubt, by the European Magical Forensics Department, as having been duplicated by Miss Edwards. Another wizard has been proven to be connected, and at present, is missing, with an international arrest order to his name, Wize Chapter. Break-ins and artifacts stolen from the British Ministry, some of which have been recovered, have been shown to have been stolen by the elf Vincento, with clear access in his role as a Mysteria. Herbert stopped mid-step, pivoting and looking towards the Witten members. Gordon Brown, who, in spite of taking all this in his professional stride, it wasn't every day that the Prime Minister was called to pass judgment at a magical inquest, stared a little agog. Yes, Harry thought, the man definitely had his mouth open a little while he took everything in as if it were routine, mundane. Perhaps it was to him, a little voice told him in his head. Maybe this is what Commons sessions were like, listening to judgments and verdicts and decisions all day. Just not about magical malpractice that involved the whole country. To that end, we have no doubt that both Henrietta Edwards and Vincento the elf, formerly of the Employers Mysteria in the Ministry of Magic, are conjurists and are, in light of their current state of health, being dead, declared so in their passing. Those words which terrorized so many exactly a month ago can be traced back to them, amongst others. I propose this to the Witten for ratification. The chicken turned into a bird as Herbert swished his cloak dramatically, his pale eyes embracing the Witten members. Gaius Lupin returned the look, Gordon Brown nodded, then looked away. What did that mean? Thought Harry. It was Draco Malfoy who spoke for all of them. Indeed, the Supreme Mugwump replied, his words as smooth as every speech he had ever given and betraying nothing of the fact that Henrietta had been a senior politician in his government in Strasbourg, and it had been under his parliament that she had got away with these treacherous acts against wizard kind, despite an inquest from the European Parliament declaring the death of an innocent woman being an act of murder or one of misadventure. It has been proved beyond reasonable doubt. I saw, from the very first moment that I met Miss Edwards, that she was of singular intellect, and to have deceived us all for so long goes only to reinforce the fact. Under the law, the judgment against Henrietta Edwards, and Vincento, is, regrettably, proven. A sound, like a great sigh, lifted across the chamber. That was damning, even by the standards of the wizards there. But, thought Harry, recalling the conversation that Cleus and his father had been having the night before last, how could Malfoy not come to such a conclusion if the evidence was irrefutable? The alleged conjurists, Swales and Blewett, who had, up until that moment, remained silent, their turn next, no doubt, must be found to be guilty if there was enough evidence against them, and so, it seems, if Henrietta had been involved, and the evidence had to be watertight, then there would be traceability to them. Should they be prosecuted, they could be also taken down for the crime of harboring half-breeds, something which, of course, the stone-silled Cleus would, of course, deeply desire to happen because of poor Remus who, according to his father, wasn't exactly dying in St. Mungo's, but was far from thriving either, despite Snape's best efforts. Harry then plucked up the courage to look to his left and, within milliseconds wished he hadn't. He thought his mother had looked ill before the trial had begun. This prosecution, albeit posthumously, had condemned her best friend as being the worst of the worst wizards, and it had been declared at a Witten, almost exactly the same as a Wizengamot. There was no coming back from that, no redemption for her friend's reputation. The anguish was deeply embedded on her face in places where Harry thought no more anguish could be etched. At least his father appeared calm, holding Lily's hand as her copper-colored hair sparkled in the candlelight. "Oh, Mum," was all that Harry could manage. Later, he wondered whether it was enough. But what could he do about anything to help her? He had felt his heart jump when she took his hand in hers, holding it firmly as if her life depended on it. He just held on, as the sea of people behind them jostled for position, as they moved and pushed to get a better view. This time though, not Thales Blewett and Mark Swales being called to the center but Cleus Lupin, Cleus in the middle of the chamber where the witnesses stood. What was he to bear witness about, thought Harry. What about those two, though, those so-called conjurists? Those who had brought the half-breeds which had attacked Remus and Sirius. Those who, Harry knew, Cleus had evidence, and lots of evidence, of them being present, and leading conjurist meetings. He stared at the wizards' impassioned faces. They would be as guilty as Henrietta, there could be no doubt. And so, Cleus Lupin got to his feet, stumbling over his words a little as he did so, but remaining firm in his intent. "I call upon." Harry looked across to Blewett and Swales. But, that was not where Cleus was looking. He opened his palm. Around him, 3 balls of glowing light, not unlike the seed heads of dandelions, floated. They came to rest on the oak lectern in front of him, their ethereal light emanating like glowworms, on Will-o'-the-Wisp. Evidence submitted. Anonymously, Cleus made sure that the word was emphasized for the Witten secretary imps as they busied themselves frantically documenting proceedings, at 11:59 am, Friday 30th of November 2009. "He's doing it by the book," whispered James Potter to his son, as Cleus waved his hand in the space above the 3 spheres. "No room for error, no getting off on a technicality. I wonder what evidence they will." But before Harry's dad could go any further, the whole chamber was suddenly filled by a blackness, which erupted from the first sphere. It was as if something had expanded to fill the space, sucking all of the light and sound out of the place. And yet, they were all there, at the periphery, like an audience on the edge of a chasm somewhere. Unconsciously, Harry put his right arm out and gripped the balustrade railing tightly. "What would you do for the internship?" The voice echoed around the chamber clearly, and then melted away almost as soon as it began. Harry strained into the blackness to see if he could discern anything that was there. The outline of a people, maybe? It was too dark to be sure. "What would you do?" "Anything." The word bit into Harry's heart like a knife blade. He knew that voice anywhere. "I'd do anything." As the blackness faded, Harry stared down towards the defense seating, where his brother sat. Sam Potter, his cheeks flushed, sat stock still, refusing to move his head up towards the gallery, to where he knew Harry and his parents would be. Could it be true? And it was not just Harry who had come to that conclusion. Behind them whispers of Sam Potter and down that could be heard, along with shuffling and murmuring. Below them, and next to Cleus, Herbert strode across. "Can we verify the date, Mr. Lupin?" "The unspeakables have confirmed both the date, time and location." And, as it has already been stated, Herbert was at pains to point out, the evidence was submitted anonymously? "That is indeed correct. Mr. Lupin," continued Herbert, striding past Cleus, bow-legged as his gait usually was, "am I right in thinking that this year Hedgewood's, through your sterling effort and ambition, opened its doors for the first time to non-wizards?" "Indeed, Mr. Herbert," nodded Cleus. Not news to anyone, Harry thought, but looking more and more contrived as Dad said it could do. The school children needed their misconceptions challenged and, I dare say, the non-wizard children had enthusiastic parents who wished to diversify their own offspring's education. However, continued Herbert, warming to the topic. The experiment has now been cancelled. Due to ill health. Suspended temporarily, corrected Callias, looking firmly at Herbert. Harry risked a glance at Hermione. What was she thinking? He would have given anything for her to be by him, giving him her lengthy, detailed opinion. To think he was missing her know-it-allness just at the moment. Several of the children became unwell shortly before Halloween. We chose to return them to their families lest their prolonged stay in a magical environment exacerbated matters for them. So you think that being in a magical environment for a non-wizard is dangerous? It's always dangerous, Callias smiled. You should know that better than anyone, Mr. Herbert. However, I took the precaution for the welfare of the children before we undertook an investigation, rather than prolonging their stay at the school. They are due to return to us after the Christmas holidays. In fact, I have several letters from other non-wizard parents who are expressing, demanding places for their children too. I soon may have to have serious discussions with Professor Snape on expansion of the school to accommodate all those interested, or set up a selection process. I confess, he added, I never did predict such a thing when first I imagined it. And, in your scheme, the internships that the evidence memory declared to us, these are also your idea? In conjunction with Draco Malfoy, Madame Legard of Buxbottoms and Professor Brueck of Durmstrang. A scheme to allow the brightest and most disciplined seventh-year student an opportunity to learn the skills of a European parliamentary member in Strasbourg. A life-changing experience. Indeed, inhaled Herbert, and one which Professor Snape and yourself have since denied to the son of the defendant Thales Blewett due to conduct at Hedgewood's. Indeed, regrettably so. The rules are very clear. Anyone displaying less than exemplary conduct would automatically be withdrawn from the internment. At his words, the room fell silent, for it would seem that Callias's words, Harry thought, might best sum up his little brother's cause. Eliminate the opposition, so he would have the only place through from Hedgewood's to Strasbourg. Only. He knew Sam. Sam didn't operate that way. Sam did not bear grudges or cheat. He would rather walk away with nothing than cheat for a place. And yet he, Harry, and everyone there, heard Sam's voice saying that he would do anything for the internment. And, of course, he had destroyed Septimus Lupin's broom at the Halloween Games Lower Hunt. But, there was no evidence, or, very little. What could be proven? And then, all at once, the words summoning his little brother to bear witness were declared and, in Callias's place Samuel James Potter was there, taller than Harry remembered, a lot paler, but head high. No humility there. His was going to be a testimony of truth, no matter what the truth was. Good on him, thought Harry. But be careful, he willed his little brother. Be careful what you say. Callias needs you to say what he needs for the result that they want, and I have this feeling if you don't say the things he wants you to, he will hang you out to dry for it. On the night of the 30th of October 2009, in the grounds of Hedgewood School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, you destroyed the broom of one Septimus Lupin, began Mescajule, head of the Errors. Silence, like the antithesis of sound, seemed to disperse from Sam as he stood there, the words coating him in blame. However, when he spoke, he did not deny it. Moreover, he gave the evidence of a young man, indeed, thought Harry, as he heard his little brother speak, the evidence of a young man is cut out for politics and government if ever there was one. Harry held his mother's hand a little tighter again, this time out of pride, his brother, their son, defending himself with grace and maturity. And, did you, or did you not declare to the defendant's son Fraser Blewett that you would do anything for the internship? You are applying for an internship at the end of the year at the European Ministry? Under the European President? Continued Jewel, his sharp eyes ever the interrogator's in his stoic, lithic face. Well, yes I am, But, so you would stoop so low as to destroy a child's broom in order to meet that end? No, protested Sam, his cool dropping for a moment. I didn't do that. It was shown that. But Jewel was staring him into silence again. This was what made the man second to none in his job. He could interrogate in his sleep, he could interrogate magical creatures. But he was objective and notoriously fair. He would take no sides. He was unbribable. Jewel was taking a few steps past Sam, darting a look in his direction as a cat might its prey. You were seen by thousands of people destroying Septimus Lupin's broom. Well, that happened, as I have said, agreed Sam, but, the boy looked desperately around him. It has been proven that I wasn't in control of the spell. It had been planted into my wand, as you very well know, Minister of Magic. He looked at Cleus as he did so, for confirmation. Perhaps, if you could explain to me. A soft, Edinburgh burr came from behind Cleus. The non-wizard Prime Minister was talking now, and addressing Sam, or possibly Cleus Lupin. What confirmation has the lad had, Minister? Cleus paused, just for the briefest of moments. The usually calm and calculated minister had clearly not accounted for that, thought Harry, as Dave Mullen's words appeared in his head again about coincidences and contrivances. Indeed, the ministry removed Mr. Potter's wand on the evening of Halloween games. It was analyzed by the unspeakables, our mysterious being somewhat engaged. Or dead, and now declared traitor, thought Harry, wryly. And the spell appears to have been very sophisticatedly grafted onto Septimus's wand, primed to be released at an exact moment. Presumably to cause maximum disruption to the games at the times that the Halloween attacks began. Cleus looked back towards Gordon Brown, who nodded, clearly satisfied. Harry would never think ill of non-wizards again. He told himself, not by the ignorance Hermione showed, and had non-wizard parents, but anything. He craned down. Demescu Jewel, his greying blonde hair, unusually short for a wizard, shimmering in the lamplight, was back up, and eyeing his prey again. Oh, he declared, so you are saying, Mr. Potter, that destroying Septimus Lupin's lightning shot was not a method by which you hoped to do anything for your internship? At this, the volume of voices behind him mushroomed, and then shrank back as the wizards and witches craned to hear the answer. Yes. No. I mean, I didn't. And you claim, on the night of, Jewel looked down on a scrap of parchment in his hand, the 2nd of October, at 11:17 post-meridian, that you were not in the company of Fraser Blewett and Henry Swales in the west corridor of the Hedgewoods Castle, and at Barnes area at night, even for heads of house and prefects. No. This time Sam's voice was steady. He had composed himself and he too was addressing those people assembled clearly and calmly. No, Minister Jewel, I was not. I would never be. Whatever the evidence you have here, maybe polyjuice potion? It's not me. I was not there, nor would I ever be, trading secrets, threats or promises with a conjurist. There was a gasp, as one, at Sam's implication. Harry looked down at Swales and Blewett again. That it was their trial, and they were yet to stand up and account for themselves. Something didn't seem right, a part of Harry's mind told him. But his forebrain was, like everyone else's, focused on Sam. Then, where were you? Harry felt his mum's hand tighten again. With me. Crystal Leah Brandt, her long, blonde hair, like a silver waterfall down her back of her Hedgewoods robes, got to her feet and moved steadily towards Harry's little brother. I apologize if this is contempt of court, sir. She looked at Draco Malfoy. However, under the circumstances, I feel that the truth needs to be told. Do continue, Miss Brandt. The Supreme Mugwump nodded his head. On the night that you say, Minister Jewel, he was with me. And, how can you be so sure of the date and time? pressed Jewel, ignoring the audience's views on the matter, which to Harry were simmering in the form outrage to scandal, seasoned with the occasional opinion in Scandinavian progressiveness and Severus Snape's responsibilities stretching so thin he had been inept, or blind-eyed. "Because, sir, it was the 2nd of October, explained the young witch, her face impassive at the scandal that she had shared with quite a good deal of people. I was saddened, as I am always, that my mother is absent, so far away. I wished to contact her, but, of course, within the Hedgewoods that is impossible. Sam is often with me. We share our time together. We are a couple, Minister Jules. And your question implies the specificity of the date and time from the image stamp. Why, it is my birthday and Sam had brought me a present." In her hand, which she had opened to show Jewel and, by extension, the whole Witan, was a piece of what looked like glass, which shimmered in a variety of colors. Harry didn't know what to make of it, but his mother murmured a word, "Watchstone." "Watchstone?" repeated Harry. "You're right," said Mick Mullen, who had crept in beside the Potters and was sitting to Harry's right-hand side. "It helps to calm her symptoms. A truth-teller absorbs all of the future memories of a person they have just met in an instant. Just think of the strain on a person's mind to carry that around with them all day. But, with a watchstone, it absorbs a lot of this power, making the burden easier to bear.